Sir, meanwhile, till Professor Ratan Singh joins, we would like to know that you have been to NLS, you have been to Delhi, you have been off and on to ULS. What is your take? What are the distinguishing features? Where you find that ULS? Uh, what are the features of ULS which you would like to have it in IPS, and what IP has taken it from the ULS meanwhile?
Uh, Chandigarh, like I have not interacted with the students in general. I have been there for things like PhD interviews or cash interviews. So there have been 3 or 4 instances when I have been to Punjab University during last 1 year or so, I believe. So the environment, you see, amongst colleagues is something which one can learn from. So that is one thing that I always remember about Chandigarh. I recall last time when I was visiting Chandigarh, and my flight was probably around evening. A few friends had come along with Professor Ratan to be with me in the guest house. So I mean, those things that generally, I mean, the kind of a warmth and depth of emotions that you find in Chandigarh University is rarely available elsewhere. And about academic environment, I believe the way I found faculty colleagues, you see, having their publications across the globe, and you see interacting with legal academics in India and abroad, and then I mean their profile demonstrated that they I mean they are academically well accomplished. So the faculty, to my understanding, is one of the best that we have in Punjab University Chandigarh, including UILS.
The smile on the face of Shruti ma'am tells it all, that she has acknowledged it like anything.
And Professor Ratan Singh has joined, so it's a compliment to all of us. I'm seeing him on the screen now.
I am thinking it is as good as Shruti ma'am has just got a good ACR, that you've done exceptionally well. I'm just.
You'll have to unmute Professor Ratan. I think he's on mute.
I'm doing that.
Morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, sir.
No, sorry, I'm late by 2 minutes. There was some problem of internet.
Not an issue, sir.
Good morning, Ratan sir.
Good morning, brother. Good morning. How are you?
I'm absolutely fine.
No, I can't ask you.
Wonderful to be on the same platform with you.
Great.
With a lot of colleagues from Chandigarh.
Yes, please.
Feeling like I'm in Chandigarh.
You are in Chandigarh, in fact.
Sir, now even Delhi is moving towards Chandigarh with the quality of air.
Yes.
Becoming better.
Yes.
Yeah, quality of air has improved a lot in Delhi, particularly.
Yes.
During these days of lockdown, quality of air has gone up. Wonderful.
Good.
But then you have humans, you see, wearing masks these days. Probably not adapted to this clean environment, it appears.
Yes.
So we are now 11:05.
Yes.
Ratanji, we are 11:05. The time showing is, so we are already 5 minutes. Just a brief. I will just say it is a pleasant moment for all of us, the Beyond Law CLC team, as well as the participants. Wish you a warm welcome to this platform. As we say, when I was seeing the topic plus the 2 speakers for the day, I was just reminded that Akbar had no Ratans. So I felt that I didn't have the no Ratans, but at least on this platform we have got 1 Ratan. Then when I saw the name of Amarpal Singh, I thought Pal in English would be friend. And once we have Ratan and Amar, so the entire session should be all Amar for all times to come. So over to both of you.
Thank you.
I will not take much time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, brother. Vikasji, really, it's a good platform which you have given to both of us. Because reason being, every day we interact with our students, we interact with our academicians, but rarely we get chance to interact with the members of bar. So I think now it's a good mixture of students and academicians and members of the bar. And I'm very sure that whatever the little time which we will spend over the topic which you have assigned to us, that will be very, very fruitful. And further, that whenever you are to arrange such type of events, you keep involving academicians to also, because academic approach as far as the practical approach is, both the approaches are sometimes different, because without academic professional approach is not possible also. So whenever you are to arrange such type of events, you keep continuing and keep involving the academicians too also, because reason being their perception about a subject is totally different as far as the practical life is concerned. But still, because reason being the task which is given to us is really very interesting, and this is really day of the point where we can deliberate. As you called me yesterday evening that we need to involve the academicians, then immediately I said, let me talk to my friend. And then we have decided to pick a topic over which we can deliberate. And the thread from where I'll start, and it continued to Professor Amarpal Singh. So once I'm to talk over the one concept about the constitution, this originalism, and from originalism to other thread, it goes to the living constitution and constitutionalism, and it will be in the hands of Professor A.P. Singh. Now, friends, let me begin and to introduce about the topic, because the topic which is for the discussion, this is about originalism, living constitution, and the constitutionalism. And before we proceed to the living constitution, I think we need to understand about originalism. Now, friends, whenever any of the nation is to frame a constitution, and there are thousands and thousands points which they need to take into consideration. Like, for instance, while framing the constitution, you need to have economic setup, political conditions, the social conditions, the geographical conditions, the cultural conditions, and political conditions, even anthropological conditions of the society. Then you are to go further for framing the constitution. Now the question is, while framing the constitution, why such type of the things which are cultural, economic, political, social, these things are to be considered or need to be discussed? Because before drafting or before framing the constitution, we need to find out that before going into each and everything about the constitution or about the law which we are framing, what are the political conditions, how this country is running, and according to which law this country is running, what is the historical background, by which regime it was regulated, it was ruled, it was governed, what are its economic conditions, what are its political conditions, and many issues like these we need to take into consideration. Now, after taking into not only the present prevailing circumstances, rather the historical aspect of the country we need to find out. Its origination, from where it has originated, who ruled, who governed, which political party ruled, which political party governed, which regime governed the constitution to the country, and then accordingly we are to proceed further. Apart from historical aspect, we need to talk over about the prevailing governing system, that what is the prevailing governing system which is ruling to the society. It is something political, it is something monarchical, it is something dictatorial, it is something social, or it is something based on the families. And which prevailing society is dominating in the governing system. So these are some of the things which we need to take into consideration before we move further, and then we have to lay down an objective clause of the constitution. That what exactly we want for our constitution. We want a socialistic constitution, we want a secular constitution, we want a democratic constitution. What is the true nature of the constitution? And while talking over the things, or roughly sketching over all these things, now, the second question will be, who are to frame the constitution? who are to make the constitution. Either this is a group of people, either they are elected, or they are corporators, or they are corporate bodies, or they are the judges, they are the parliamentarians, they are jurists, who they are who has to frame the constitution. So these things are to be taken into consideration for this. Now, while considering all the things, we have to find out now a group of people who are to construct the constitution, who are to frame the constitution, and their intentions, their social intentions, their personal intentions are again very much important. For example, a group of about 200 people is created to frame the constitution, and what is their political affiliations, what is their social standards, what are the academic auras, and what are their personal relation with the society. These things are also important to take into consideration, because reason being,
I'm sorry to bother you. I've just
Pardon.
received Mr. Amarpal Singh just wanted to have a test of his mic.
okay,
So just try it.
Am I audible?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
according to
yes.
me, yes.
Amarpal
Yes, it's
audible.
perfect. It's perfect. No, he had sent a message to me. I just wanted that before he takes over, let's remove the glitches if there are any. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Okay.
Now the question is, we have to see all the things about intentions of these persons, like personal intentions, their social intention, and then comes about the drafting aspect. Now, before further drafting, we have to find out about social moralities. We have to find out a secular morality. We have to talk about the economic morality too also. Once these things are there in the mind, then we have to go for the language, that what language is to be used, how this is to be drafted, and which language is to be followed. Now, apart from the language, then the most important question which always be there, that whether we want to have a very rigid constitution or we want to have a very flexible constitution. Because reason being, accordingly, language is to be used. Okay, everything is decided about the flexibility of the constitution or the rigidity of the constitution. Now, constitution is drafted, it is framed, it is before us. Now, question comes into about its working, about its execution. That one idea is a originalistic approach. That right, a constitution was drafted and it was commenced in 1950. And right now in 2020, whether we are to take the same meaning as it was given by the people who have drafted in 1949, whether the same meaning is to be given or the meaning which is at 2020, that is to be developed and that is to be applied. So that is a question of interpretation, and that is a question of construction. So there is a one school of thoughts, and this school of thoughts is called as originalists. That's why we say the topic is about originalism. Now, those who are the originalists, if I ask a question in 20, that what should be the interpretation of the constitution, and according to their observation, they say the original understanding of the constitution is to be taken into consideration. Even though we are interpreting right today, but whatever the viewpoint, whatever is the observation which was taken into consideration right in 1949, we have to take the same meaning. That is the aspect of the philosophy which says that original understanding of the constitution is to be taken into, and further they say, what does it mean we have to take into consideration? We are not to take into consideration what it ought to mean. What exactly was, either this is 100 years old constitution or more than 100 years constitution, we have to take the meaning when it was developed, when it was framed. Because reason being, they also gave one observation that once the constitution comes in the hands of the interpreters, like for instance, they gave importance to the judges. They say once the constitution comes in the hands of the judges, they gave a different color, different shade, different shape, and the sovereignty of the people with which it started, that we the people of India constitute. They say ultimately, after passage of time, when it is interpreted by their own ideas, by their own philosophy, by their own psychology, so then the color of the constitution is changed. So that is why they say the sovereignty of the constitution, that should be remained in the hands of the constitution, in the hands of the people. Rather, it should not be given to the judges with the interpretations. Now here, No, those who believe in the originalist school. This originalistic school is again further divided into two parts. One is intentionalism and other is textualism. Now, intentionalism means those who believe into the school of the intentionalism, they believe that the framers of the constitution, their intention is most important. Mean the intention of the framers of the constitution when it was framed, that is most important. We are not to go for the language. Text is not important, rather language, this text is not important, rather intention is important. So they were called as an intentionalist because this is one approach from the originalism. But this approach have not got much appreciation. And another approach which came, it was a textualism. Because I say originalism, and originalism was further in two approaches. One was intentionalism, and those who said intention of the makers of the constitution is to be taken into consideration. And the second was a textualism, that the text is most important, and the language which is followed, which is used, that is to be interpreted in the same way as it was given maybe 100 years before. So these schools and the followers of these schools, they were start called intentionalists and the textualists. Now, when we talk about the textualists, they have not given much regard to the intentionalist. They say what are the intention, what are the aim, those who have framed the constitution, that is not much important. What is the text, what is written, that's most important. And now this school in 1930, the honorable judges of the Supreme Court, Justice Hugo Black and Justice Scalia, they were the proponents of this philosophy. And they believe that intentions of the makers of the constitution, that cannot be a common intention. They may have their personal vendettas, they may have their personal approach, they may have affiliation, they may have a different social background, they may have a different economic background. So it means their intention while framing the constitution cannot be common. So we are to see about not the intention, we need to see about the text. Now, apart from looking into the text, they further say when you are making a law, you are making the constitution. It is the constitution which is changing the society. Their approach is totally different. It is the constitution which is changing the society, and the society cannot change that. Because initially when they gave the approach in 1930, they were very rigid that the constitution changed the society and society cannot change the constitution, because the reason being, if the society is to change the constitution, then every day we have to change the constitution, every day we have to change the law, then again and again we need to rewrite the constitution, again and again we have to amend the constitution, and again we need to reshape the constitution. So that was one of the other observation of this textualist and originalist approach. Now, while coming from 1932 onward, there were many scholarly articles written in Yale Journal of Law and many other scholarly articles, and probably the judges of the Supreme Court also, they dwelt over and they deliberated. And ultimately, from the judgments of Honorable Judge of the Supreme Court, Justice Scalia, we can find out that he was not much strict as far as the construction is concerned. He said, yes, I believe in originalism, I believe in textualism, but I do not believe in strict construction. The construction must be so liberal and it should not be so rigid. It should be lenient and it must be fair, which is understandable to protect the interest of a prudent person. And rather, this Justice Scalia, he agitated the other judges of the Supreme Court that let us construct the Constitution of America in such a way which should not lose its original character. Because reason being, the Constitution of America is losing its original character. Reason being, once again and again it was interpreted, again and again new concepts, new philosophies, new agendas are put into the Constitution, and you just see the day when it was commenced and now today, if you just see the total color and total philosophy has been totally changed. So that is why they were of the observation that we need to find out originalistic ideas of the constitution, so that it should not come in the hands of either of the parliamentarians, either of the legislator or jurists or the judges to give a totally different shape. No, right from this originalism to taxolism or intentionalism, because there was a fight in between the originalistic school and then the new school which came into existence, like who thought of about living constitution. Because living constitution people, they are not in favor of originalism, and the originalistic, they were not in favor of living constitution. So there was edge of fight in between both, and the new concept came into existence that was called as new originalism. It was also called as originalism 2.0 or new originalism. No, just very interesting. The new originalism says that whenever the meaning of the constitution or meaning of the text is to be given, that must be a public meaning originalism. Mean the concept of the language is to understood in a such a way as it was understood by a prudent person at the time when the constitution was enacted. So what was a prudent person's approach at the enactment of the constitution? We have to take into consideration these things, then only possibly we can find out a good solution in between the originalism and the living constitution. Now, everybody, they say certainly this is a very new good approach, which is interpreting about the taxolism and intentionalism. But even the judges of the Supreme Court and the president, recently the President Trump in America, he appreciated the judges of the Supreme Court that now they have developed a new approach, that thinking the law or taking the law from a public observer, public supporter, or from a prudent person's approach. And then even President of America, he stressed upon the judges in many of the meetings that the approach which is to be given to the constitution for interpretation, that is to be a very welfaric approach, which is to be understandable by a prudent person. So accordingly, probably nowadays when we are getting the judgments of Honorable Supreme Court in America, probably a different approach we are getting now. Now, there other question comes into when we are talking about originalism. Now, question arises is whether the originalism is a theory of interpretation or this is a theory of construction. Because originalism says take the things as originally or interpret the things as originally. So sometime we developed into that to take whether this theory of originalism is a theory of construction or theory of interpretation. Because reason being, when we talk about the theory of interpretation, it is very clear. We interpret the things when meaning is clear. When there is no ambiguity, their meaning is clear, then we interpret according to the factual positions, according to what are the facts before us, and then we interpret the law. But the question comes about construction. Construction, when there is ambiguity in any of the law, and while constructing, we draw the conclusions while constructing any of the provision then put forward. So absolutely, when we make a comparison in between the interpretation or theory of interpretation or theory of construction, certainly we will say the originalism is not theory of construction. Certainly this is a theory of interpretation that we need to interpret accordingly. Probably one example as far as theory of construction is concerned or theory of interpretation is concerned, we can, or I can share with you. Like for instance, a constitution was framed and it was constructed, and in the constitution there is a provision, exactly it is never, but there is a provision, for instance, that all the parliamentarians shall wear the latest fashion dress when sitting in the session. So it means they have to wear an attire of the latest fashion when sitting in the session. This was right passed in 1950, for example. No, right now it's a question of 2020. Now, if we are to interpret, and whether should we say the interpretation as our originalistic approach? No, as far as the originalistic approach is concerned, and if we interpret and apply the originalistic approach in 2020, can I say that they have to wear the same cloth, the same attire as it was decided right in 1949 or 1950 at the commencement of the constitution? And the answer is no. Because reason being, it says about the latest attire, and the latest attire, even it says something application of the same principle but the same principle is to be applied in the present scenario under the present circumstances. So it's a question of expected application. Originalism does not mean that as it is as stringent, as rigid we have to apply. Rather, this is we are to apply in the expected application and expected application of the law in the prudency or in the present scenario and the present circumstances. Now, there is another issue, because before I move further with the living constitution, there is another approach. It's called as living originalism. Because I was talking about the originalism, I was talking about intentionalism, I was talking about textualism, I was talking about new originalism. Now another approach is which is called as a living originalism. And a living originalism means one school believe in original intent, that we have to interpret the constitution, what are the original intention of the framers of the constitution. And other school interpret, they say living intent is to be taken into, not original intent, but the intent of the present day. That is the living intent. And that is exactly those who have framed the constitution. Even right at the time they said Indian constitution, for example, if I'm taking an example of the living Indian constitution, so they said Indian constitution is a living constitution. So one school says the original intent is to be taken. Now the present school says it is the living intent is to be taken. So there is a fight in between the original intent and the living intent, and in order to resolve this fight, then they say we have to find out living originalism. This is the other agenda now. This is another approach, other interpretation, and other philosophy to interpret the constitution, that we need to adopt a living originalism philosophy. Now, taking the instances like from originalism to intentionalism until this living constitution, take for instance of the Indian Constitution. Friends, when our Indian Constitution was under the process of its drafting and the construction, the scholars like all over the world, they were looking for the Indian Constitution, because reason being those who were involved into the framing of the Constitution, they have a great experience in the respective fields. Like when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he was involved into the framing of the Constitution, and he himself gave a statement that the Constitution should not be so rigid. It should be very flexible, but it should not be too flexible that if it goes in the hands of the wrong people, that something worse can come into. He said, if we will make a rigid constitution, this will hamper the growth of living, vital and organic people of the country. Not only Pandit Nehru. Apart from this, hundreds of the scholars were there who were of the observation that what should be the nature of our constitution. Because why we need a flexi constitution? Because again and again we cannot redraft, we cannot rewrite the constitution. But whatever the conflict comes in between the originalism and the living constitution, that can be resolved by finding out another mechanism. And other mechanism is that originalism, living constitution, and the constitutionalism. These three principles can be concised, can be analyzed, can be workable on the basis of principle of rule of law, separation of power, and this judicial review. The secretary, who was again helping very much as far as the drafting the constitution, when he said that while we are drafting the constitution, at least we want first 5 years that nobody will say us to change the constitution, not to change the constitution, because for the first 5 years there is a total, all the states who are joining, they are from the different setups, they are from the different environment, they are from the different culture. So new states are coming, new states are joining, new culture is joining, new philosophy is there. So accordingly, for the first 5-7 years, there will be frequent change in the constitution. So we cannot make a very rigid constitution. Because reason being, under Nehru, he said, after all, the constitution is meant to facilitate the working of the government and administrative authorities. And if we imbibe such principles in the constitution, which are so stringent, which are so strict, then what are the objective clause of the constitution we cannot achieve? And rightly said Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who is always called as a strong man of the constitution. a tall man of the constitution. Why I say tall man of the constitution? Because he is the man who has given the healthiest, the widest, the longest, and the strongest constitution. And rightly, he showed his fear also, that this is one of the best constitution in the world. But if this will comes in the hands of the wrong people, this will prove as the worst constitution. And he was the man who used the first time in the constitution the word living constitution. And he said Indian constitution is a living constitution. Because reason being, why living constitution? Because he has got the best of the best from the other countries. Take for instance, if you talk about fundamental right, you talk about rector principle, you talk about socialism, you talk about amendment, you talk about any of the part of the constitution, and he has followed and he has retracted best of the best from the constitutions of the world. Now, Constitution of India, I'm just giving an example of the Indian Constitution. It is drafted, it was commenced into in 1950. Now the question is, right in 1950 to onward, whether in today, in 2020, are we following the original spirit of the Constitution? Do we believe into the textualism? Do we believe into the intentionalism? Do we believe into the living spirit of the Constitution? Because we have different approaches. If I go with the different judgments of Honorable Supreme Court, probably the spirit of the living Constitution is pregnant in our Constitution. But I take few instances of some of the landmark judgments of Honorable Supreme Court where the textual approach was also followed. Like for instance, in A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras, there was an observation whether principles of natural justice is to be followed, because that is something intentionalists. Those who believe in the intentions of the Constitution, they believe into the principles of natural justice. Or the second approach was, in this case, whether the first approach was the principles of natural justice is to be followed, or the enacted law of the state is to be followed. Then the Supreme Court said we have to follow enacted law of the Constitution when the question was due process of the law, because Article 21, we all know, it provides about no person shall be deprived of his right to life and personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. Now, when the question is about procedure established by law, are we talking about a due procedure which is there in America? Are we talking about the procedure which is based on the principles of natural justice, or we are talking about an enacted piece of legislation as we have IPC, CRPC, or procedure laws? And the court said textualism is most important. We are to follow about whatever is the procedure established by law. So it means, no, this is one instance where they are much stressed about the textual observation and the textual philosophy of the Constitution. And similarly, when we talk about originalism, in Keshwanand Bharati's case, the observation which they have given that the basic structure of the Constitution cannot be changed. So what is the basic structure? That is something originalistic idea. That was there in 1950 about the originalistic idea until today and probably years to come when this principle is to continue. So that is the originalistic idea. Now, apart from this, again, there was another intentional approach or a textual approach in some of the case laws, like in Shankari Prasad versus Union of India, in Golknath versus State of Punjab, when there was a dispute between the difference between law and amendment. And accordingly, they have taken an approach which was intentionalist approach. Now, intentionalistic approach was that what is amendment? There is no difference between amendment and the law. And if there is no difference between amendment and the law, then as far as Article 13 of the Constitution, state shall not make any law which takes the fundamental rights. So it means fundamental right cannot be changed. And if we want to change the fundamental right, if we want to amend the fundamental right, then we have to constitute a constituent assembly. So probably even that principle was set aside later in Keshwanand Bharati's case. But the question or point of my observation is that even after the commencement of the Constitution, there are many laws where the principle of originalism and the principle of textualism and the principle of intentionalism, that was observed and that was followed. That is why we do have many principles of interpretation of statutes which says that what are the aids on the basis of which we can interpret the constitution or interpret the law. And we always say also the speeches of Constituent Assembly, the debates of the Constituent Assembly, that we need to take into consideration in order to understand the true meaning of this. So it's been in present day of 2020, even the constitution is interpreted, it is to be constructed while taking the spirit of the originalism. Now take for instance another example as far as the originalism is concerned or textualism is concerned. Right, our constitution was commenced in 1950, and the agenda before the government was that we must have a socialistic idea, the socialistic laws. There must be some of the laws by which we should take a socialistic philosophy, so the interest of all the people is to be protected. And they tried that the economic resources of the state is to be concentrated in the hands of the state, so everybody get a minimum survivalhood. But again, the problem was in order to find out socialism and to execute the socialism, one of the law like Bihar Land Reforms Act in 1950 came into existence, and this law, it was taking some of the rights from some of the people and the rights about the property. When this law was enacted, and Mr. Kameshwar Singh, Kameshwar re-challenged. He said this is violation because reason being this is violation of Article 14 of Constitution, this is violation of Article 31 of the Constitution, which provides about right to property. You cannot take our right to property because this is a fundamental right. No, this is very difficult because reason being now the Patna High Court, they said, okay, certainly this right is unconstitutional, this is void. Now it is again a very big hurdle for the government that if such type of judgment come before us, then how we can bring the socialism. Now the question is whether the socialism was a part of our constitution, whether it is imbibed in the provision of the constitution, or is there any provision in our preamble. We can find out there is no any provision about the socialism in the preamble. Even though much discussion was there in the Constituent Assembly regarding to put the word socialism or not to put the socialism, and there were a lot of ifs and buts to put this word socialism or not. And what happened ultimately, this word was not put into, but idea was there, because if you just see the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly, many of the people, they were beating the drums about the socialism, but intentionally they have omitted the word. They said this, the whole of the constitution is pregnant with the meanings of the socialism. If you talk about Article 14, about 15, 16, 17, 19, 21, Directive Principle of State Policy, all it speaks about. So intention of the makers of the constitution is there as far as socialism is concerned, but in the constitution, there is no any word of socialism. So right from 1950 to onward, when this judgment came, and then accordingly for the first time by first amendment, this constitution was amended, wherein they have added Article 31A, and then accordingly Schedule 9 was added into to protect the interest of the agrarian society, land, the tillers, the landless agricultural labor. Basic idea was to bring the socialism. Now, it took about 1951 to onward till 1976, it took about 25 years to add a word socialism. Now, I'm again coming with this about importance of the text. If the word text was not there in the preamble of the constitution as a socialism, whether the intention was also absent, though the question is, the intention was also there. So it means we have to correlate when we talk about originalism. On the one side, it flows from originalism, that is textualism and intentionalism. This textualism and intentionalism always continue with the constitution. Either if we enter into a phase of the living constitution, intentionalism can never be undermined and textualism can never be undermined. It is to work accordingly. Now friends, just see from these case laws, if I start moving further, Honorable Supreme Court, while interpreting the different aspects of the constitution, either this Article 14, where we say it's really a different type of jurisprudence Supreme Court has created. Either you talk about Article 15 and 16 or 19 or 21, or maybe from 25 to 28, a total different type of jurisprudence Supreme Court has created. Till date, I think that portion will be certainly dealt with by Professor A.P. Singh. But till date, we have a different canons and the different approaches, which I always say, a feministic jurisprudence developed by Honorable Supreme Court under the shade of the living Constitution, a labor jurisprudence developed by the Supreme Court under the shade of the living Constitution, a environmental jurisprudence developed by the Honorable Supreme Court under the shade of the living Constitution. And if I start counting the number of cases, if I start counting the different type of the jurisprudence, probably we require days and days and days and days to deliberate over this. Next issue regarding the living Constitution, regarding the originalism, is I hand over to Professor A.P. Singh. Thank you very much for this.
May I continue, Professor Ratan?
Yes, sir.
I'm audible as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Professor Ratan. You have made my task easier, covered almost everything. So this is now roughly 11:44, and if I take even 20-25 minutes, the question answer session would start around 12:05, 12:10, something like that. I hope 20-25 minutes is not an issue.
Certainly, Professor.
So thanks once again. You have made my task easier. You have covered almost the entire range of arguments relating to the textualism, intentionalism, the originalist approaches that we had, and you see the counter approaches and how they have been, interpreted and complied with, reflected in the constitutional interpretation that we had in the post-independence phase. All these points have been covered. In fact, you have covered even the area of living constitution as well. I'll come back to that. But before I come to that argument, and obviously I'll be concluding with that argument, let me briefly talk about the idea of constitutionalism that remains untouched so far. Idea of constitutionalism is basically an idea whereby the law in text, whatever law is, the textual law is subjected to the standards of a higher law, meaning thereby that the touchstone of the law that we pass, either in terms of a constitution or of a legislative enactment, needs to meet higher standards. So easier would be to, without getting into the theoretical, underpinnings, there was this Saint Thomas Aquinas, a priest back in 12th, 13th century in England, who would talk about two types of laws: human law and divine law. And his interpretation would be that human law would be valid only if it meets the standards of divine law. It cannot really breach those boundaries that are fixed by that invisible law. Now, this invisible element is something that always remains behind the textual personality of the law. So, say for example, we talk about basic feature doctrine, which is also an attempt to actually capture that spirit of the constitution that we generally talk about, that law always have a word and a spirit behind it. Now, this spirit, which is explained in terms of a higher law, or as some people would call it, meta law. That is, meta means something beyond the law. So say for example, Kelsen's Grandon theory would subject a law passed by the legislature to a norm which is beyond the text, which is a higher form of norm. So unless your current norm that you have enacted in the form of a legal instrument, unless this text actually meets the standards of a higher norm that he would call normative system, then your law is not valid. This is what we generally follow in our general legal life. So say for example, a legal instrument passed by a legislature will have to meet the standards of the constitution. Similarly, because constitution is the ultimate law, the grand norm of the system, is it that it also meets to certain higher norms? And that is the intent of constitutionalism. Before I move on, let me explain it. This is an important point that we need to take note of, that constitution and constitutionalism is something that necessarily does not go together. It doesn't go together. Meaning thereby that there could be a system where you have a constitution, but there is no constitutionalism. And there can be a system where you have no constitution, but constitutionalism is so well, entrenched in the system. So say, for example, British system is said to be a system which has no constitution. But nevertheless, the standards that they follow in terms of constitutional principles and the interpretation of law, despite the fact that they have no constitution, their constitutionalism is something that is talked across the globe, and we take precedents out of their interpretation. On the contrary, if you talk about, say, Pakistan, our neighbor, they have a constitution, but when their constitution goes out of fashion, nobody knows. So there is no, tradition of constitutionalism. Looking at the idea of constitutionalism this way, we will appreciate that the idea of constitutionalism basically emphasizes on the checks and balances mechanism, which also means that the constitutional document, which creates a vast paraphernalia of institutions from top to bottom and confers power over them, it also by the same document keeps the power checked. This check and balance, that the constitution gives a power but also creates a barrier to it, that this power is not misused. So in that sense of the term, what constitutionalism basically requires is that there has to be a reasonable system of governance and not a system of arbitrary fiats. That is the kind of an intent of constitutionalism that we generally talk about. Therefore, the constitutionalism, briefly speaking, would mean the standard which any kind of a constitution will meet, sort of a invisible spirit that keeps on hovering behind the text of the law, and the law will always have to meet those standards. Now, the kind of a discussion that you had, I will not go into the theoretical portion of it. One thing can always be, one take that I pick up from your discussion is that constitution in any case will have to change. The only point remains as to how fast or how quickly it shall change, or how far can you really change the meaning of set of words in a given context. That is the only question that remains. Now, in case of this interpretation process where the set of words would change their meaning, to what extent? What is the limit? Constitutionalism will provide that limit whereby the constitution will remain in check. I'll give an example that probably will make the point clearer. Look at the broad structuring of Indian constitution. So say, for example, your preamble comes first. That talks about the general philosophy of the constitution, that its nature, that it is a sovereign constitution made for the people and the people have given it to themselves. So first the philosophy of the constitution, then comes the territory of India, then comes the citizenship, then comes the rights of the citizens, then comes the duties of the state, and then thereafter comes a state. And in fact, when you talk about the state with reference to the rights of the citizens, you basically put a sort of negative barrier for the state, that Mr. State, you are so and so, but you will not breach these boundaries of fundamental rights of citizens. The point that I'm trying to make is that the broad structuring of the constitution also demonstrates that the constitution is meant for the people, and therefore whatever powers they be will have to meet certain standards. This is precisely the idea of constitutionalism. Now, I just quickly, quote from A.V. Dicey, who talks about that there is a lot about the Constitution beyond its text, because he says that there are in fact social rules arising within the practices of a political community which imposes important but non-legal limits over the text of the Constitution, meaning thereby that the living life of the people actually creates certain boundaries whereby the constitutional powers will remain in check. In fact, the theories that you talked about, originalism or all that, Professor Dworkin's work, wherein he talks about that hypothetical intent theory as to what the hypothetical intent of the framers was, actually talks about some kind of a political morality. So, say for example, in the current context, when we talk about right to free speech and expression, whether this free speech would include porn on the internet as well, the answer would be no. One can extend that meaning to that extent, that my free speech would actually require that kind of a content of the internet. But the political morality of the day that keeps on evolving alongside a living constitution will tell me that this is not, the way you will interpret the constitution, because it is likely to affect the sensitive minds in the society. So what exactly, the constitutionalism, the intent of the constitution is that the constitutional text in any given context will not be interpreted in such a way that the functionaries under the constitution exceed their powers. It always remains subject to a higher law, subject to a living morality, and therefore Dworkin in his work talks about two things: one, the written text of the constitution, and the other, the political morality. And it is the balancing between political morality of the day and the written text of the constitution whereby you will have to draw the limits of your interpretation. In fact, in another context, a 1973 judgment of US Supreme Court, the name of the case came, Miller's case, it is something that I remember right now, which talked about, with reference to obscenity basically, it talked about contemporary community standards. Now, this is a different context altogether, but it comes very close to Dworkin's political morality, that this political morality has got to be understood in contemporary community standard. That remains the sort of a touchstone. Briefly understood constitution this way, when we move on to the Indian Constitution, which is considered to be a living document, let me quickly define what living constitution or living law really means. From a commoner's perspective, it really means a document which transforms as the necessities of the time and situation demands. The set of words are actually are framed in such a broad context that they keep on evolving along with the community. In fact, a living constitution is said to be developing along with the needs of the society. The argument that is given in favor of this living or evolving constitution along with the society is that the expressions that we use in a constitution are so broadly worded that they can really fit in any kind of a circumstance as it emerges in the life of a living community. And you have already referred to that statement of Pandit Nehru that he made while presenting the provisions of amendment to the constitution, the objective resolution that he presented, wherein he said that you need to have a document like constitution a flexible element, because if you keep this a rigid element, then you really hampers the growth of a dynamic community. So the dynamic community itself, you do not really have to lay down the law for the coming generations. Coming generations will always have their own way of interpreting these things, and the constitution-like document has to be kept in such a broad frame that the evolving community can adapt and make it suitable to its needs. Now, if you look at the Indian constitution from that perspective, you have referred to a lot of cases, but the last 50-60 years interpretation process has actually made the constitutional document a truly living constitution for all practical purposes. In fact, immediately after the constitution gets framed and implemented, and the first case lands in the Supreme Court, the idea of taxation, etc., this debate actually emerges in the very first case of A.K. Gopalan. And despite the fact that it was on record, B.N. Rao, who was the technical advisor to the Constituent Assembly, his task was to go around the world and meet the higher functionaries in those systems and try to understand as to what exactly have been their experiences of working out the constitution. So when he went over to US, he met Justice Frankfurter as well. So at that point of time, Article 21 was already available in the draft format, and it's you see the which was original draft of the constitution was Article 19, which was later on turned into Article 21. It provided for that no person shall be deprived of life and personal liberty except according to due process of law. It is said that, and Professor B.N. Rao in his memoirs have written that Justice Frankfurter told him that you need to avoid this. So the expression procedure established by law, the Article 21 now reworded that no person shall be deprived of his life and personal liberty except according to the procedure established by law. The point that I'm trying to make is that though it was actually on record of the debate of the constitution and on record that framers of the constitution wanted that the due process kind of an interpretation should not be given to the constitutional document, and it has to be a procedure established by law in the sense the law as it is enacted by the legislature. Nevertheless, you had a dissent of Justice Fazal Ali, who said that every law passed by the legislature cannot be law unless it meets the standards of that higher law. He talks about it natural law, but this is precisely what constitutionalism is all about. This is what he talks about. And in fact, though Gopalan is known to be the textualist interpretation or say positivistic interpretation of the constitution in its, the highest watermark as it is known to be, but immediately thereafter, in fact, you find Supreme Court starts, changing tracks, and it starts interpreting the constitution in much more, what should I say, in the way the creative interpretation of the constitution, the tradition that we have across the globe, in terms of a constitutionalist interpretation, in terms of interpretation of constitutionalism, where broad meaning is given to the constitution. So, say for example, in Khadak Singh's case, which came to the Supreme Court within 7-8 years of the constitution, I think the judgment was delivered in 1958. Supreme Court actually articulated right to privacy. This becomes very much important today when you have so much of surveillance and you see the intrusive technology coming into play, where a state actually uses this technology for surveillance purposes of the individual. But at that point of time, right to privacy constituted as though the police regulation of state of UP was upheld by the Supreme Court, but you had obiter that, well, there is a certain level of privacy that the state will have to manage and will have to respect. And later on in Makhan Singh versus State of Punjab and Govind versus MP, and obviously now in 2015, when we come back to Puttaswamy's case, Supreme Court has, you see, come a full circle. But this idea was articulated back in 1950s itself, meaning thereby that the constitutional interpretation in the hands of the judiciary has always been on very creative lines, and it was an interpretation which actually followed the tradition of constitutionalism and of living constitution. So therefore, if you look at some of the areas, you have already talked about some of the areas, right to life has become so big, and it's a kind of an umbrella wherein dozens of rights have been adjusted within the broad expression of right to life. Similarly, procedure established by law for all practical purposes has become due process of law. A full-fledged human rights jurisprudence has been developed by interpreting. You see, without overruling Gopalan, Supreme Court actually interpreted the constitutional text in such a way that, you see, all kinds of rights which are not simply, as Justice Fields put it, a mere animal existence. So human is not one who simply exists as an animal. He has to have all those rights. So full human rights jurisprudence, which has informed our criminal justice administration in a big way, from those early cases of Joginder Singh versus State of UP to Maharaj Singh, and then Nandini Satpathy, PL Dani, and later on to DK Basu and all those cases, a whole human rights jurisprudence that informs our constitution, our criminal justice administration today, was developed. Public interest litigation and what later came to be known as social action litigation by Professor Bakshi has actually changed the very idea of or the role of the judiciary has got changed, in fact, because judiciary in its earlier the traditional way, the judiciary would work in a what we call adversarial pattern of litigation, actually came to apply a whole range of tools and techniques of inquisitorial process in PIL, where judiciary is not simply an independent umpire that really looks at the argument of the two sides and delivers a balanced opinion. It's not no more like that. In fact, in some cases there is no adversary at all. A simple letter coming to the Supreme Court or a simple personal knowledge of the judge, it turned into a writ petition. So whole lot of instruments by the judiciary were used for the purpose of making this inquisitorial process of litigation that really constructed a huge number of other principles. So environmental jurisprudence, the expression environment wasn't existing in the constitution prior to your 48A and 51A as such. In fact, during early 1970s, Professor Bakshi would call Indian constitution environmentally blind constitution. In fact, the word environment was not there, but during 1980s, by these new techniques of interpretation, Supreme Court literally turned the whole constitution upside down and included right to pollution-free environment within Article 21. In fact, Supreme Court took roughly 10 years in accepting in so many words that right to pollution-free environment is part of Indian Constitution. In 1990, Subhash Kumar versus State of Bihar. But if you look at the some of the High Court judgments and the initial treatment of environmental cases in the Supreme Court. So, say for example, the Dehradun Valley litigation case was actually the writ petitions were accepted under Article 32, and this was a basic argument in T. Damodar Rao case in Andhra Pradesh High Court, that Supreme Court has actually been treating these things under Article 32. Otherwise, which right is supposed to have been violated by the state system? So the point is that this entire range of arguments that was adjusted, and the constitution was given an interpretation which suits the needs of the community and thereby serves the purpose of a living constitution, was made possible because the tradition of constitutionalism, that is that there is always a higher law, a meta law. You see, just as we say, I'm not sure if you see, we have seen that meta constitution theories that now form part of US jurisprudence. But say, for example, metaphysics. What do you mean by that? Physical is this world. Meta is something beyond that. So metaphysical is something which is beyond the material world, that is terrestrial world. So meta constitution are those standards which actually exist, remain like a spirit, invisible, but as Justice Bhagwati puts in Bachchan Singh's case, a brooding omnipresence behind every provision of the constitution. You see, another example can be given of rule of law, which is more or less like constitutionalism. Because you see, either you talk about basic feature doctrine, or you talk about rule of law, or you talk about identity of the constitution that Supreme Court does in 2007-8 onwards in M. Nagaraj and other cases. All these attempts are actually attempts by the Supreme Court to capture that spirit of the constitution that we are trying to talk about in terms of constitutionalism. So constitutionalism and living constitution and that intentionalist interpretation of the constitution are really all theories that complement each other and make the constitution a fit document which govern the life of a dynamic community in a proper way. And you see, there's a reciprocal arrangement as it appears to us. It's not like an adversarial pattern where constitution will change the society or society will change the constitution. Some kind of a reciprocal arrangement where these two elements actually affect each other. Constitutional principles do affect the life of the community, and life of the community does affect the interpretation of the constitution. That is the tradition that we have followed, and the kind of shape that Indian constitution has acquired. This is a very limited area that we had talked about. I mean, 4 or 5 points that I had covered. You can actually talk in terms of wonderful interpretations in federal theories that we have been talking about. So much so that you see the what we call cooperative federalism that we kept on talking about for several decades in terms of political theory has now become part of, you see, the political language. And now almost everybody, you see, from prime minister to the ministers and other people talk about some kind of a, you see, cooperative federal structure of the country coming into play and the country coming together to fight, you see, variety of crisis. Like, I mean, today as well, we face some kind of a crisis. So this entirety of the interpretation process has been made possible because we have followed certain well-established tradition where constitutional document really takes care of the sensitivities of the society and the social, or what Professor Dworkin says, political morality affects the interpretation of the constitution. That is the way the constitutional interpretation has gone. And to my understanding, the kind of a constitution that we have is something that every Indian can legitimately feel proud of. The kind of a evolutionary trajectory that this constitutional document has taken and has actually regulated the dynamic life of a dynamic community is something that can be said to be one of the brightest experiments of democratic functioning across the globe. This is a process, you see, which no other country can really claim. I mean, there are democratic experiments elsewhere in the world as well, but these experiments have never been made with such a wide variety of community, with so many numbers, like 130 crore people living a democratic life, so much of variety. I mean, which actually is a mind-boggling. I mean, even Indians sometimes feel so confused. I mean, the amount of variety that we have. I will stop, you see, here. Maybe that's more questions, may elicit more information. But my time is over. It's 12 now. I have already taken 5 minutes extra. Hope this see the combination of constitutionalism, living constitution, and originalism being complementary ideas of each other, making constitution a living document, regulating the life of a dynamic community in a dynamic way, is what really this entire discussion was intended at. Thank you so much for patient listening. I wait for your questions. Probably that might elicit more critical ideas. Thank you, Professor Ratan.
Since I
Yes,
was
sir.
upright,
Yes, sir.
just hold on.
Sir, I have a question already from Rajiv Joshi ji, who says, if I see the concept of judicial activism as one of the emanations of the living constitution, or do you subscribe to the old school view that administration is best left to the hands of the executive, and judicial interference in the actions of the executive can be termed as overzealous? 2 points are precisely. Judicial activism is not actually something that emanates from living constitution. It is actually an instrument to make living constitution meaningful. That is one point. Second, the supervisory role of the judiciary over executive and legislative mechanism is inbuilt in the constitution. So therefore, though there has to be a balance, that's why we call it check and balance. There has to be a balance, but the judicial role in all kinds of policy making and legislative enactments cannot be whisked off, because that is part of the constitutional document itself. I hope I have at least partially answered the question. There appears to be another question. Can preamble be said as standard of which you are talking about as a standard for meeting the constitutionalism needs of constitution? Look, sir, this is a huge philosophy.
Sir, sorry to bother you,
Yes,
Professor Amrapal, because you are reading the questions, the other people will not be able to know what question was posed. I will just read it for your convenience, because the grasp of a professor with that of a student and lawyers cannot be matched up. I will just read the question so that you can answer it.
Please.
Because people will not come to know what question was posed to you.
Please.
But we will take first question first of yours, because I have been told by Professor Ratan Singh that you have some other engagements. Once your questions are over, then we will ask upon Professor Ratan Singh. He is with us only.
Sure.
Please.
I have been asked privately, asked you, sir, Professor A.P. Singh, to explain the concept of sub-constitutionalism again in brief.
Principle of constitutionalism.
Sub-constitutionalism.
Sub-constitutionalism.
Yes.
To be very frank, sub-constitutionalism, I haven't come across this expression, sub-constitutionalism. I have not read this. Constitution, can there be a concept of sub-constitution? That I didn't understand. I mean, I would like to hear from the person who's raising the question probably, because sub-constitution is not an idea, I think, which I have ever explored. Can I listen from the person who's articulating this question?
I will just try. If you
Probably what I feel is nowhere such a, sub-constitutionalism is described anywhere. Maybe the person who has asked the question may have a more knowledge over this. So probably we can listen.
That's why I thought that we may have
unfortunately, his name is not written. It's simpliciter written iPad. So iPad always thinks ahead of time.
Okay. Sub-constitutionalism, yeah. So I express my inability in actually explaining, because I have never come across this expression.
Yes.
The iPad will have to go through the Google.
Okay. But these questions can come through, you see, mails or messages as well. Sometimes it might happen that some questions remain unanswered. They can always come through messages. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Ravi Raj asks, can preamble be said to be as a standard of which you are talking about as a standard for meeting the constitutionalism need of our constitution?
To be very frank, the philosophy of constitutionalism would go beyond the preamble. Preambular philosophy is the basic minimum that a constitution needs to meet. In fact, preamble performs three functions. Let us be very clear about it. It is an enacting clause 1. It expresses the nature of the system. And third, it talks about the commitments of the system. So therefore, the preambular philosophy as a whole is the basic minimum that the constitution needs to meet. The idea of constitutionalism goes beyond that. It actually fixes certain higher standards, wherein any kind of a mechanism or an instrument created for the purpose of bringing the preambular philosophy into operation needs to meet the standards of constitutionalism.
Sir, Mr. Vivek Slathia is a good friend of ours. He says that I can slightly explain on this aspect which was raised. Vivek, over to you.
Yes, Vivek can.
Yes, sir.
Vivek fortuitously has been a student of Mr. Ratan Singh. So
Yes,
obviously his Vivek would always be better.
Sir.
Vivek,
Sir, thank you very much, sir. Good afternoon to Ratan sir and Professor Amar sir.
Vivek, could you come on
to
video,
the
please?
subconstitutionalism-
Vivek, video.
Yes, sir. Hello.
Could you come on a video?
Hello.
Yes,
Sir, am I audible?
Vivek. Yeah, it's audible.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Vivek.
Sir, according to me, subconstitutional is a concept that primarily is not prevalent in India. But if I have to give my take on subconstitutionalism, it would primarily mean something that is existing in the American setup. It is a concept of somewhat which we can say there can be overlapping of powers between the center and the states. Like in case of federalism, which is in its truest form in the US Constitution. So once I am to explain what is subconstitutionalism, it would primarily mean a constitutional framework within a constitutional framework, and wherein the center and the state would have overlapping powers amongst themselves so as to have a functional constitutional framework. This, according to me, is in the shortest possible form what can be a concept called subconstitutionalism, or in other words, we can equate it with the term federalism also. So this is what I feel would be the interpretation. The rest I would leave to Ratan sir and Amarpal sir.
Vivek, can I ask? Answer to Slathia.
Sir.
Yeah, in fact, Slathia, what I feel is this is a question of interpretation, because you may equate with this federalism, or you may equate that some of the provisions or some of the principle and philosophy in American Constitution.
Yes,
similarly, because reason being, as it is what we have fundamental principles in any of the constitution, the principle like of sub-constitutional is yet not in discussion or not a part of the jurisprudence. Quite possible some of the scholars may have interpreted the things in a such a way and coined the word of sub-constitutionalism.
Yes, sir, that is there. Sub-constitutional primarily would be a two-tier constitution within a constitution, sir.
Yeah. Once
so,
we talk about
whenever we are talking...
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir.
I say once
sir, I'm hearing, sir.
Once we say something about sub-constitutional, once we add the word sub, it means certainly this is the part of the constitutionalism. So that's why I say this is some question of interpretation. Yeah, this is a question of interpretation.
Yes, sir. Sir is absolutely correct.
Right.
Thank you. Ravi Joshi also takes certain classes.
We can go ahead for other questions.
Sir, Joshi also
go ahead for other questions.
Sir, Ravi Joshi also wants to slightly elaborate. He's also another good friend of ours. He also takes various classes. He just also wants to have unmuted him.
Thank you so much. Just an advocate taking pro bono classes with students. Somebody had posted it on the group that subconstitutionalism is a concept quite explained by Tom Ginsburg in 2010. This is a two-tiered constitution system. My friend Vivek was right in saying that in US there is a system that they have a constitution for the center and they have a constitution for the states as well. As we all know, they have 51 states, they have their own constitutions, and they have one constitution for the center. So this is a two-tier constitution system wherein two constitutions work at the same time. There are many examples here: US, Germany, Australia, and many other. Even so much so that in the article that somebody had referred to, somebody was even referring to the concept of European Union, whereas all the member states retain their original constitution, but they have in a way given themselves to the concept of constitution by the European Union itself. Now, this is the extent concept. So, two-tiered constitution is something new that is emerging the world over. In this part of the country, though, we don't have that. We just have one constitution which deals with the center as well as the states. Yes, sir, you can carry on.
So somehow, since we have an active participant, Shikha also wants to elaborate what is sub-constitutional. I thought that once we were slightly in a gray area and we are getting a good platform where we can have knowledge. Shikha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Vikas sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, everyone, or like Vikas sir, Rajiv sir, they already stated what's up.
Shikha, you would have to come slightly. Shikha, you would have to come slightly to the closer to the mic.
Sir, is it fine now?
Yes, branches can expand, but we still want the tree to be connected much better. Thank you, Shikha.
All right. So, as Vikas sir and Rajiv sir already stated as to what sub-constitutionalism is, according to my view, I just want to give another instance. Like in USA, we have the concept of dual citizenship, unlike India. So, similarly, in India, like we have the concept of constitutionalism, wherein by the powers have been the governing bodies, they have the limited power. Similarly, in USA, there has been the constitutionalism within constitutionalism. That means once the country is imposing the concept of constitutionalism, the states themselves further they are imposing the concept of constitution. This is what sub-constitutionalism means. That means a constitutionalism within the constitutionalism. That's what all I can elaborate upon it. Thank you so much.
Since large number of people have said, Dev Shekhar has also posted on the chat. We will not take him on board now. He has already elaborated more on that. So whosoever wants to do that, they can examine. Thank you, Dev Shekhar. We are not taking you on the board because large number of questions are there. Since we have got two professors of vast knowledge, people are feeling that they should get enriched themselves. Maybe the rain clouds it's raining outside, but we are having a rain of questions out here. So you will just have to bring the umbrella so that we can control it. What are the limits of an ideal constitution? Sir, any of you can elaborate.
Limits of an ideal constitution are to be. May I go on?
Yes, sir.
Hello. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Limits of an ideal constitution are not something that you can define in advance. They are always to be determined with reference to a particular situation. That is one reason why, while we talk about basic feature doctrine, you do not define it exhaustively for all times to come. What will constitute a basic feature, what shall constitute a limit to the constitutional powers is something that will get determined with reference to a particular context. So there cannot be a permanent, a norm that can be fixed for all times to come of an ideal limit of a constitution. Ratan sir, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, definitely. Just see, once I was talking about originalism, and the word I used was living intention or living intentionalism. And once I say living intentionalism, means we are to take the things from a person of well-prudency. So whatever a person of prudency feel like about the standards of the constitution or the standards of the law, probably what I feel that these are the good standards which are laid on. Because reason being, as Professor AP said about the basic structure, initially when this doctrine was laid on and few principles were fixed up, like they said about rule of law, separation of power, and principles of natural justice. Now, from time to time, the new judgments came into, and the new other theories and new other principles were added into the basic structure of the constitution. Well said by Professor Singh that we cannot stick and we cannot lay down the lines and the boundaries. It is just something evolving, and it all depends on the society, depends on the culture, political parties, and will of the political parties to execute the spirit with which we have to frame constitution.
The time is around 12:26, and I was told that Professor AP Singh had to had another engagement. So we will just take 2 questions and then we will wrap off. And our apologies to the entire participants whose questions could not be taken. I'm just asking of Mr. Ravi Raj. Can preamble be said as a standard of which you are talking about as a standard for meeting the constitutionalism needs of our constitution? Professor A.P. Singh ji, it is posed to you.
I'm getting the point. Preamble basically is a sort of promise, or as somebody would put it, a new statement of a new social compact between the governed and the governor. That is what preamble is all about. Now, preamble is the minimum standard that constitution has to meet. Constitutionalism, I will reiterate it, constitutes a slightly higher level of idealism. Preamble is the minimum that we are looking for. Constitutionalism is a higher level of, you see, in the normative structure, it shall be a higher level of an ideal that constitutionalism would seek to meet. So therefore, there cannot be like, they cannot be compared that way. One does not become the preamble as such is not the touchstone of constitutionalism, but the constitutionalism will always remain the touchstone of every single provision apart from preamble. Preamble is a basic goal, the minimum goal of the constitutional text, in fact.
Rather, what I feel is this is the starting point only.
Minimum.
Yeah,
starting.
This is the starting
minimum.
Point only.
Constitution sets a higher level of moral standard, so to say, or a higher level of idealism, I would say.
Yeah.
Saurabh Khorana probably is again your student.
Yeah. Saurabh was my student.
Yes, sir. I just gauged it from the fact that once Vivek is your student, then Saurabh should also be.
Definitely.
And I could gather from the fact that Vivek is doing well, Saurabh is doing great. So the nursery from which these trees have come to our platform of the High Court, it should have been from the nursery of Mr. Ratan Singh only.
Please,
what are the global implications of Indian Citizenship Amendment Act? This question is posed by Saurabh to both of you, or everyone he says. Anybody can answer. What are the global implications of Indian Citizenship Act?
The idea I got, but it is too huge a question to be answered in so short a time.
I will share your mobile number with Saurabh. Saurabh would connect you directly.
No, there is no confusion about it that it does have global implications. There is no confusion about it. The extent and you see the intensity of impact would depend on the diplomacy that Indian diplomatic community can really carry on across the globe. So implications are certainly there. There is no confusion about it. You see, as far as legalism is concerned, legally speaking, it is okay, but constitutionally, diplomatically, it is going to have huge implications. So, I mean, how much, to what extent, with how much intensity is something that diplomatic, you see, effort of this country would determine in the days to come. Professor Ratan.
Yeah, what I feel is, in fact, this question of Khorana is really absolutely very right. But as far as the implications are concerned, we all daily in the newspaper we read, and probably the observations of many of the countries probably we do note also. And what I feel is, again, 1.5 hours is required for debate and discussions over this issue. Because as far as this is having something which is cultural issues, religious issues, and constitutional issues, and apart from this, at international cross-barrier, cross-country issues also.
Thank you, sir. Since we have already crossed 12:30, I'll just ask, before I will ask Vivek to take over for a vote of thanks, I just wanted to say one thing. After this session, I was always believing in myself. Could I relive the university days? Could I connect back the issues which were always boggling in my mind as to whether I could get it clarified, etc. Is one issue. After hearing both of you, I feel that I've revisited. It's a flashback. I'm reminded of the song "Koi Lota De Mere Beete Hue Din." Beete Hue Din have been Lord Gaye, and over to Vivek for vote of thanks. And before that, just one line: those who want to be updated or on our all topics and sessions, connect us on Facebook page and Instagram or on WhatsApp group. Thank you. And over to Vivek, student and teacher back. Vivek. I will just check as to whether he's muted or not. He's muted. Just hold on. Vivek.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, as sir has very well told that I have been a student of Professor Ratan Singh, and for me, sir is an authority on administrative law. So, I, on behalf of Beyond Law CLC and Chatrat sir, would like to thank Professor Ratan Singh and Professor Amarpal Singh for sharing their intellectual views on originalism, constitutionalism, living law, and textualism, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Professor Ratan Singh sir had introduced the theoretical framework of the concepts, and Professor Amarpal Singh further explained the concepts by taking a practical approach and explaining the practical side of concepts. Amarpal Singh sir and Ratan Singh sir have elaborately dwelled upon these theories and as to how these theories can be harmonized and can be used to interpret the Constitution. It was indeed a pleasure and honor to have both Professor Amarpal Singh and Professor Ratan Singh today with us. I, on behalf of Beyond Law CLC and Chatrat sir, would like to thank the participants who have attended today's session. Thank you very much.
Shruti ma'am, just a word, though there's never a vote of thanks again, but I felt Shruti ma'am has been a pivotal role for this entire journey. So Shruti ma'am, just a word because we have overstretched ourselves.
Yes, just wanted to put in a brief vote of thanks for both Professor Amarpal and Professor Ratan Singh. And as you said, Amar and Ratan. You began with that and we end with that. And one short, question, we leave with the question, which is that we may agree that the Constitution really lives and grows, but in which direction ought it to grow and at what pace should it grow? Those are questions which I think we need to think about. And I think somewhere Justice Chelameshwar and Justice Chandrachud's judgment in the Puttaswamy case would be relevant here because they spoke about living constitutionalism, which was the concept that they were talking about in our in the Indian context. Thank you so much, Professor Ratan Singh, for holding the flag high of UILS, and Professor Amarpal, this is the first time I've heard you. Such a pleasure, sir, and hope to do it again. Thank you, Mr. Vikas Chatrat, for making this possible for everyone. And the audience has been extremely interactive. Great session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. And in the evening, we are having a session of Mr. Atul Lakhanpal, Senior Advocate, the President of the Bar. He will give the journey of NDPS, what has to be done, what has not to be done, points discussed, what are the gray areas. So those who want to connect in the evening, connect at 6 o'clock to hear Mr. Atul Lakhanpal live. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Stay safe. Stay home. Thank you.